If you like this type of research, if you're interested in learning more about the data that is used in these research reports, you can check out my platform, Ticker Trends. Ticker Trends is an alternative data research platform that I use for all of these research reports. So you can see all the screenshots throughout them. These are all from the Ticker Trends platform. Now, the way that I release these research reports daily on both Twitter and Medium is that, it's impossible for me to track hundreds or thousands of companies on my own and all of its associated data. So the way that helps me do this is through the Ticker Trends platform, where I can track thousands of data points for different public companies and cryptocurrencies automatically. And then I can find those specific terms, those specific data values that are doing very well, which then leads me into these research reports where I look deeper into them and potentially uncover some form of alpha. And I think the really cool thing about this is that with just maybe an hour of my time to write some of these research reports, and without having to track, thousands or hundreds of companies on my own, by being able to do this all automatically through the Ticker Trends platform, I can find some really, really cool things. But without further ado, one of these companies that I'm going to be covering today is called Deckers Outdoor. Now, as I was mentioning before, this is one of those companies that's one of those needle in the haystack companies. So when I was writing this research report initially, when I started it, I wasn't sure how good this opportunity would be. And by the end of it, I really decided that this was an actionable insight that I was interested in executing on. And of course, make the decision for yourself. Now, the best sorts of these research reports is also whenever you have in-person experience seeing these products, seeing these companies out and about. And basically the way that I initially heard about Deckers, although it was something that I was tracking on, of course, Ticker Trends beforehand, is my friend, when I recently went on a trip to New York, was pointing out that some people were wearing these shoes, and I started to notice them more and more throughout New York and on my trip. And of course, that led me to then want to look deeper into this. And whenever I looked more into this outdoor clothing trend, athletic wear, and specifically some of the brands that Decker Outdoors owns, I was very surprised to see something that I thought was very exciting, especially in the current fashion environment, I guess you could say, that a lot of people are spending their money on. So if you're interested in reading this report directly, I will leave a link down in the description down below. In addition to the regular Medium account for Ticker Trends, I will leave a link to this article specifically, which is basically a more in-depth version of what I'm going to talk about in this video. There is also a Twitter thread on this, so if you'd like to see an even more condensed version, then you can go to the Twitter thread, where I also go over some of the data and some of the reasons why I thought this was an interesting opportunity. Now, the first thing that you need to know about Deckers Outdoors is the two largest brands that make up a majority of their revenue. So if I go down here on the article, you will see that I have this revenue statement, which I actually pulled up right here. And the two largest brands for Decker Outdoors is Uggs and Hoka. Now, specifically, Uggs is a really great brand, but the brand that was the one I was talking about that my friend saw in New York was the Hoka brand, which I had previously never heard of. Now, a really good thing about Decker Outdoors, or ticker Deck, is that this is really a pure play into these two companies, which is what you want to look for when you're looking to trade based on alternative data, or whenever you're looking to trade on specific trends in general. Because if you have a company that's very diversified with like 100 products or 20 products that make up their entire revenue, it's going to be really difficult for that company to move in any substantial way based on just one of those products or companies performing very well. Whereas with Decker, since it's basically just two companies that make up, I think, 87.5% of the total revenue, it's really easy to just track those two companies and then be able to see how well the company is performing overall. And then those other brands that they have don't really matter too much in terms of price action. So those two brands are UGG and Hoka, as I was mentioning before. Hoka is actually currently the larger brand with the most recent quarterly earnings being around $330 million in revenue for Hoka and $207 million in revenue for UGG. Now, an interesting thing about UGG is that some of these brands performed exceedingly well during COVID. And specifically, UGG is a brand that I remember looking at during COVID because, some of these shoe trends kind of started during that period. In addition, another company that was interesting was things like Crocs. And there was also another company called On Cloud, which went public a little bit after the pandemic. And so these are all kind of alternative outdoor fashion shoes that were initially kind of nerdy or weird, but became really fashionable within certain parts, within certain places. Now, if we look at Uggs specifically, something that I was very happy to see is that currently this is the trend data for Uggs. Based on the previous year data for Uggs, you can see that Uggs is having an extremely strong holiday season already. And so if you look at this chart here, you can see that Uggs are very seasonal. So during the holiday season, specifically, they have some winter Uggs, since there's a lot of fur in the regular Ugg shoes. You can see that basically the trend matches every single holiday season. They spike extremely, a very large amount. And you can see that compared to where we are right now in October 9th, compared to the previous year's data during October 9th, around October 9th last year, we were at 34, and currently on October 9th, we are at 66. So this is just relative data in terms of the trend values. But needless to say, last year was a record holiday season for Uggs, as you can see from this chart compared to 2020 and 2019. And this year, it is already about double what it was at last year, which was a record year, which indicates some really interesting things about the Ugg brand. So the Ugg brand, which is the less significant one, is already something that I would almost invest into this company on just based on the Ugg data. However, the Uggs is not even the brand that I was talking about. The brand that I was talking about that my friend was mentioning in New York, like I mentioned before, was this brand called Hoka. So here is the trend data for Hoka. And Hoka is basically a sportswear, athletic, hiking type of shoe that's very colorful, kind of alternative compared to something like Nike or Adidas. They're a little bit more flashy, and also like thicker soles and things like that. But you can see here that the Hoka brand has been on fire. So over the past couple of years, this brand has been expanding immensely. And something that I would compare this to is something like OnCloud. As I was mentioning before, this went public during the pandemic. And the reason being is because OnCloud itself was extremely successful as well. It's a brand that's on the come up, and it's in a similar lane of this type of outdoor fashion shoe that kind of catches on, even though it was originally meant for sports. So if we go to the Hoka website, if I can show you what this kind of looks like, the Hoka shoes currently look like these general styles, and they're popular for kind of streetwear and fashion, in addition to actual outdoors. So people who are going hiking, people who are running marathons, these shoes regularly show up on the top marathon shoes for people to run in. They also regularly show up in different fashion trends. So I will put up an image of the Hoka Pinterest, where they show some of what people are using Hoka shoes in terms of what outfits they're wearing and things like that. And whenever I saw them in New York, this was a large part of how I saw them. It was not only people who were just looking to wear a comfortable shoe, but it's also more of a fashion statement in terms of something that's very trendy, in terms of something that's not Nike or Adidas, but something different. And this is really picking up a lot with a lot of different consumers. And actually, I do mention a lot of this as well in the Twitter thread. Now, the reason why this is such an interesting opportunity, as I mentioned before, is because these are the two companies that make up a majority of Hoka's revenue, and both of them are set to have relatively record holiday seasons. And in terms of price action, if we go back to the Ticker Trends platform and enable the price action is really important for me because it tells me a general idea of what the rest of the market sees in the company. And in terms of Deckers, this is a really strong setup because I don't necessarily think the market has realized the gravity of growth that the two largest companies making up Decker Outdoors revenue have been experiencing. But we can see here that there's starting to be a change in interest in the Deckers company. So this is a really good entry point, at least in my opinion, even in this more bear general market that we're in, since sometimes when companies like this perform exceedingly well during a bear market period, then those investors that are exiting the rest of their positions will see, the one company that's green, and it can kind of exacerbate those moves even in a bear market for a company that's performing exceedingly well. So here we can see that investors initially thought that this would kind of follow the rest of the market, that it was an overinflated company. So it started to correct with everything else. And then recently it has kind of decorrelated from the rest of the market due to some strong earnings reports. And now going into the holiday season, based on the data that I was showing before in terms of Uggs and the Hoka brand, which has become extremely popular and is experiencing meteoric growth, I believe that through the end of the year, this is going to be a really, really strong hold. Now, in terms of when I would exit this position, because the entry is just as important as the exit, I think that by the end of the year, I will be exiting this position unless there is some new information that's going to come out about this brand. Some things that I would look for are things like potentially the Hoka brand moving more into clothing. Hoka is really successful for shoes right now, but I think if their brand can move into clothing similar to something like Lululemon, and if they have a lot of success in clothing, then that is something that could potentially be an additional piece of information that the market takes a while to price in. But once we have a really strong holiday season and once that's priced into the stock, then I think it might start to get a little bit overinflated based on, just the numbers that we're seeing. And potentially, I don't know how well this company is going to do next year in their holiday seasons. So my exit point will be roughly around the holiday season. And of course, I will keep updates for this on the Ticker Trends or at Ticker Plus Twitter, which I will link down in the description down below.